I'm Sheila Tainter, and on behalf of Storm Surge, I would like to welcome you to the final program in our Fall 2020 online speaker series. Zoom has allowed us to continue to provide these educational programs in the days of COVID-19, but I've never been as grateful for it as I am today. I didn't have a single worry about the parking lot being plowed or people being able to get out and attend today. So this is good. Last month, Landscape Bob Ulick taught us about green infrastructure, what it is and how it can be used to make communities more resilient. He shared examples from other countries, from projects he's worked on in Boston, and ended showing us where it could be useful in Newburyport. Tonight's program, Planning for Resilience, with people, place, and planet in mind, builds on that theme. Our presenters will share what resilience looks like on the ground and how it responds to the challenges of climate change while also supporting community goals like food security, natural resource protection, and equity. They will use the themes of people, place, and planet to communicate the importance of planning for resilience and taking action. I am so pleased to introduce you to Steve Whitman and Liz Kelly, two fighters on the front working for individual and community resilience throughout New England. Steve Whitman has been working in the public, nonprofit, and private sectors in New England for over 23 years, with a specialty in natural resource-based community planning, sustainability, and resilience. He is a certified permaculture designer and teacher and works on ecological design projects and courses here in the US and internationally. He established his firm, Resilience Planning and Design, to assist agencies, organizations, and communities with planning initiatives and implementation efforts that reinforce their visions and future plans for resilience. His work includes strategic conservation planning, comprehensive planning projects in small towns and large cities, and regional and watershed scale natural resource planning. Steve is also an adjunct faculty member at Plymouth State University, a municipal planning board member, and is an active board member for two environmental nonprofits. Liz is also a professional planner and ecological designer who has worked on projects for municipalities and organizations focused on natural resource protection, urban design, transportation, food systems, and sustainability. She formerly worked as a municipal and regional planner and is highly skilled in group facilitation, organizing workshops, public speaking, policy development, program management, and plan writing. Like Steve, she is a certified permaculture teacher and an adjunct faculty member at Plymouth State University. She is currently the board chair of the Permaculture Association of the Northeast. After the presentation, there will be a Q&A, but during the presentation, Storm Surge volunteers Sarah Tappan and Heather Lip will be monitoring questions in the chat window. So please feel free to ask any questions there. We are looking forward to a good, robust discussion afterwards. And now let's welcome Steve and Liz.
I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right, I believe that should be showing up correctly for everyone. Okay, so thank you all so much for joining us here tonight. Steve and I are really excited to be invited to speak with you on this topic. It's something that we do and work with every day in our jobs and in our personal lives. And so you'll see some photos up here of both the communities that we work in, as well as even on our own properties, particularly Steve's, and I can point that out when we get to it. But the time feels really poignant for this conversation as we close up 2020 in just a couple weeks and begin envisioning what's possible in the year to come. So we're going to share with you a bit about our outlook on what resilience is and how it can be interpreted on the community scale. We'll also talk a little bit about how communities, towns and cities can improve their resiliency to a variety of challenges that are facing pretty much human society nowadays. And we'll also discuss some example projects that we think could be inspiring for Newburyport and other surrounding communities. Okay, so what is resilience? So many of you may already be familiar with the definition of resiliency. So it's often referred to as an individual or a community's ability to respond, adapt, and recover from change and disruptions, such as those caused by climate change, which is one particular issue that most people think about when they hear resiliency and resiliency planning. But there's a lot of other issues that are facing our communities, including habitat loss, even the effects of income disparities and systemic inequalities, food security issues. And a lot of these are interrelated with each other. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that can look in terms of devising, complex solutions for these interrelated challenges as we go in this presentation. But when many of us look at the communities within our respective geographic area, whether it be a state or a region, and we look at how well some of our human design systems function and how well they hold up to change or disruption within a system, and these human designed environments that I'm specifically talking about might be our transportation system. It might be our built environment, our roads, our infrastructure, our food system. And many of us would say that in some ways, even for the communities that are most forward thinking and most proactive in planning for the future, that we're not where we want to be. We're not addressing these challenges fast enough at the rate that they're happening, and that we're seeing negative impacts from them. And so this is why this topic is so poignant right now, and will be for many decades to come. But we're really looking at resiliency and helping communities prepare for the future in a kind of positive framework. And so we're really looking at it as a way to help municipalities and cities and even nonprofit organizations that are working within those places to really think about how they can develop flexible solutions for some of these major issues that we're all facing right now. As many of us know and are probably familiar with at this point in time, our current systems are based on a globalized economy. They're based on fossil fuel consumption. They're based on capitalist ideals. And while that has brought us a lot of success in some ways over past years, we're seeing other negative impacts from some of those systems and how they're designed. And so we're really looking at how we can take a resiliency perspective into redesigning elements of these systems into the future. And what we're seeing is that one of our greatest teachers, and you'll see this often in resiliency literature, is nature herself. And so we can see that as an example in even a healthy forest ecosystem being able to regenerate after a major disruption, whether that be human caused, like deforestation or something like that, or a natural disaster. And I just wanted to also reiterate that resiliency is built by people, grounded in place, and serves the planet. And so that will be these three common themes we'll weave throughout this presentation tonight. And that resiliency in one community is going to look very different than resiliency in another community as far as planning for the future goes. It's really based on what a community's resources are, what the characteristics of that place are, what the public is currently supporting and already has in place for different types of programs and initiatives. And so that's a really important element, I feel like, to emphasize as we go through this. You'll see each community that we reference is very different in how they approach planning for resiliency. And so we did a little research into what Newburyport is already doing as far as resiliency related initiatives. And we found a lot of really great programs and plans that have been developed and put in place. And so some of you might even be part of these initiatives or are familiar with them already, but I know that the city has released a climate resiliency plan just recently in October 2020, which identifies climate change hazards and adaptation strategies to mitigate some of those hazards in the future. Transition Newburyport, what a great organization that really represents local grassroots action and kind of reimagining a post-fossil fuel economy and community. And then the city is already partnering with great businesses like Black Earth Compost to offer municipal, curbside pickup of food waste to turn that into usable soil. So these initiatives are really important to highlight and serve as a great foundation that can just be built upon into the future as the city continues to invest, hopefully, resources in building these out further. Okay, Steve, you're up.
All right. So before we launch into this particular slide, I guess I wanted to reinforce a couple of things that Liz mentioned early on and kind of set expectations for all of you who are watching from home. We're trying to walk this interesting line in the half hour or so of presentation before we get into discussion between kind of broad overview of what resilience is from our perspective, and there are many other ways to view it, and some of you may share the ways that you're seeing it. And some specific strategies, examples, hopefully some inspiring initiatives that will get you excited about what's already underway in Newburyport or surrounding communities, or things that you think it's time should happen. And so you'll notice that for this presentation, a lot of what we're sharing is very solution oriented and kind of comes from an abundance perspective. And a lot of that comes from our permaculture training of recognizing, yes, there are problems, but kind of wringing our hands and worrying about the future doesn't move things forward. Digging in and looking for where the problem is actually a solution to some other need, and looking at the complexity and asking questions and not feeling like we have to show up with the answers just to show up is really important. So this piece, a systems perspective, we thought was really important to share tonight with all of you. It may be new for some. So the idea is that in addressing the complexity of community resilience, it's best done by adopting this system-wide view, for stepping back, and as Liz pointed out with forest ecology, kind of looking at the whole system instead of focusing on the beauty or the problem of one particular plant or component in the system. So just as natural ecosystems are complex and interconnected, so are our human settlements. So we want to recognize that our human settlements have that complexity, even if they are a little bit more on the fragile side. Ideally, our human and natural ecosystems are interwoven, and each element we find in the system has multiple functions it can serve. All of this contributes to our resilience. It provides redundancy in the system, and it means that if we are hit unexpectedly by something, we have more likelihood that we can bounce back, recover even stronger than we were before. The other thing that's nice about a systems perspective is we look at how energy flows in and out of systems, how energy flows in and out of neighborhoods, out of towns and cities. And natural systems do not create waste. They recycle materials. They provide their own energy. Human systems inherently do provide waste, create waste, and have a lot of externalities we need to think about. So in that kind of examination of the two, we can see some of the fragility that exists in our human towns and cities. All right, next, Liz. So green infrastructure, we realized that Storm Surge just had an event focused on green infrastructure. So we wanted to use that as a theme, and it's really important in all the work that Liz and I are doing. So we wanted to bring it in case some of you weren't part of the event last month, and also just to hear a different take on what green infrastructure is possibly. Green infrastructure, as the slide says, is really understanding this interconnected network of ecosystems that exist in our communities, from site scale all the way up to the region that surrounds. And we also refer to green infrastructure as living infrastructure, if that helps you kind of imagine the complexity and the benefit of the natural resources that exist in your communities. Living infrastructure may be a way to do that. We think that this is foundational to community resilience. It's really what is needed to make us resilient to storm events, a changing climate, impacts our own human health. We've seen the power of nature with the pandemic and how people have reconnected to natural places and the outdoors in ways we hadn't anticipated in 2019, maybe. Our food systems and many other aspects of community. To understand and be good stewards of our green infrastructure, our living infrastructure, we must know what we have. So we have to inventory it. We have to identify the disconnects in the system and recognize where damage has been done and think about regenerative solutions, repairing solutions as we go forward. And then make plans in our community master plans and our open space plans and the climate plan that I saw on Liz's slide and other efforts that may be driven by the municipality or might be grassroots groups such as Storm Surge. And we need to do this not just in the pristine and intact natural resource areas, our kind of rural and open space areas, but in our downtown areas, in our suburban strip mall areas, areas that have seen maybe more damage and are more devoid of natural systems. They may need it the most. And so as I go to the next slide, I want you to, some of you may be asking, but why? Like, what is the benefit of green infrastructure? Go ahead, Liz. And a real short answer on this is we look at all of the ecosystem services provided by an intact natural system. And even through the introduction of street trees in the neighborhood, we can start to tick off a number of ecosystem services that are going to be provided that weren't there before. So because we know there are many benefits from natural systems, and we recognize that they're cost effective, they directly benefit humans and other species, and because community resilience is just not possible without natural systems and the critical benefits they provide, we really want to stress ecosystem services. I think one of the other nice things about ecosystem services that can help broaden the conversation and broaden the stakeholders that we engage in community work and in the work that many of you are doing is it provides more possibilities of things that people can get excited about, of yields that they want to see delivered in their neighborhood or in their community. Some people are very focused on habitat. Some people are really worried about water quality, carbon sequestration, education of young people in the outdoors, the ability to go fishing and hunting, and on and on and on, as you can see around the wheel. So with this broader understanding of what is delivered by intact, resilient natural systems, we can start to pull more people around to be part of creating the solution. Next. There you go.
Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. Okay, so what can we do in our own homes, in schoolyards, in public parks, public libraries, these specific sites within our communities to improve our resiliency to a lot of these different challenges and issues that are a little bit more, global in scale, but also seen in terms of local impacts as well. And I think that this is a really important piece of the puzzle, this site scale work that can have pretty dramatic impacts, especially if you look at sort of this green infrastructure network that Steve was highlighting so well in his portion of the presentation, as far as kind of interconnected green spaces and how soon these start to function in a more holistic way when you start to add them up. And so I wanted to just touch briefly on sort of the site scale of this work and how really some of these individual places can both provide for the natural systems that exist within an area, serve the community in broad or specific ways, and also demonstrate regenerative design. Okay, just go with it. So some of you might already be familiar with some of these tactics that I'm showing on this slide here. But single sites have the potential to capture and store energy. They have the potential to create habitat, to build healthy soil, to filter stormwater. All of this can happen on one site, regardless of whether it's a 1/4 acre lot or it's a 10 to 20 acre parcel, regardless of whether it's in an urban area or in a more rural area of a town or a city. And so if we really view our a single property as a system in and of itself, we can begin to place some of these different elements that I'm showing here, some of these different design elements in a way that mutually benefit each other and the people that are going to be using the property. And so some of these should look somewhat familiar to you, whether that's utilizing or harnessing the energy of the sun, for example, as well as other types of renewable energy sources in the design of a property, in installing those types of systems. I know that Massachusetts has done a lot of work investing in renewable energy systems, especially solar programs, incentives, and those types of programs essentially for homeowners and other type business owners, even municipalities, to engage in. And so I know that up in New Hampshire, we definitely look to Massachusetts as an example as far as some of its clean energy programs and such that people can take advantage of. Steve mentioned a little bit of some aspects of this in his part of the presentation, but food production, edible landscaping, and rewilding our more manicured spaces presents an opportunity to really increase biodiversity and habitat within our communities. And so you can see in some of these images here, pollinator-friendly gardens have become really popular in schoolyards. They've also become more popular in public parks. Usually communities can partner with other organizations to do this very inexpensively and affordably, whether that be a local garden club, whether that be the school system. And there's a lot of different grants that are available for these types of projects, and they're great for demonstration purposes. And they are also exciting for educational as well, in terms of teaching about biodiversity and insect habitat and things like that. The middle photo here shows a rain garden, which is one type of stormwater management, low impact development type strategy that more and more communities are using to capture stormwater runoff from roadways. Homeowners are even building or constructing rain gardens to capture rainwater from their roofs, from their driveways, pretty much from any impervious surface that sheds stormwater runoff. So this is another mechanism that that can be used within a community to really improve water resources and the quality of water resources. I know that I did see the city of Newburyport actually does have a rain barrel program, which is pretty cool. And so oftentimes a rain garden can actually be cited as an overflow. So if you attach a rain barrel that captures water from your roof and use that to maybe water the veggies in your raised beds, an overflow can be set up to exit some of the water during a really heavy rain event into that rain garden. And it can just represent another perennial, beautiful edible garden within your landscape. And then composting as well. Always opportunities whenever gardens are being constructed or installed or maintained throughout a community. Composting goes with that very much hand in hand. It's a way, especially if it's done effectively, to reduce money that's spent on this fertility boosting product by producing it on site. So all of these different mechanisms can be promoted by nonprofits. They can be used by homeowners. They can be, promoted by the city or by a town itself. It can be really effective when cumulatively, when more and more people are engaged in them. Okay, Steve, you're up.
Okay. Liz, if I start going too slow, feel free to start moving my slides along. That'll be a good cue. So while we need property owners engaged, we also need towns and cities engaged. We're going to show a couple of examples here. We won't go too deep into them. If there are questions after, we can be happy to answer questions and provide our contact information. But this is just really kind of to give you a flavor of lots of different approaches. This is a story of Franklin, New Hampshire, fairly typical former mill community in the Northeast, having fallen on hard times, loss of industry, aging infrastructure, all of that. Liz, next slide. And what they're attempting to do is to green the downtown. So we're going from site scale now to kind of neighborhood or downtown scale, green the downtown from the outside in. That's really been their approach. They're surrounded by lots of large, intact open spaces, rich natural resources, recreation opportunities. And in the middle is this struggling, aging downtown with a lack of affordable and appropriate housing, jobs, businesses, and so on. And it's really disconnected from the natural resources that surround it, but that's changing. So next. And what's interesting in reflecting on tonight and sharing this with you is this didn't start as a resilience initiative. I mean, I'd love to tell you that they were excited about community resilience and that's how they really get excited. It started as a story of survival and about understanding the assets that they had and understanding where their relationship with nature and parts of the community was fragmented. And some of the, from an equity perspective, some of the people that were suffering the most. People of a lower income level, people who have small children, older folks. And so what they started to do through this re-examination is look at lots of ways they could improve housing, transportation options, the local economy, food security, and other aspects of the community. Next. And this river plays a major role. The Winnipesaukee River passes through Franklin. It was the reason for Franklin being there and for all of the dams and the mills that made the community so profitable in its heyday. But it's largely become a dumping ground. It's become kind of the backside of buildings, a story that we know in coastal communities happens quite a lot as well. And so they're turning back to the river. And we'll go to the next slide. One of the ways they're doing that is by taking a large piece of land that's owned by the city, that's right in the downtown, that's been largely ignored and had become kind of a dumping ground, and turning it into a large, holistically designed park, free, open to all, accessible to all, with a variety of activities that will take place on the land-based park, and then within the Winnipesaukee River itself, a whitewater park, the first of its kind in the Northeast. So it's really, really exciting. But what the park design shows is a model, kind of a pattern book for the rest of the downtown. And it's already excited the minds of many developers who are now coming in and are excited about this park and other parks on the other side of the downtown that had been long in existence, and trying to figure out how to help the community re-stitch the green or living infrastructure through the downtown, reintroduce street trees, better deal with stormwater, so that the river remains clean, provide opportunities for perennial agriculture and lots of other things. So Franklin's a really exciting one to watch in 2021. A lot of construction on the park will begin. If you need a trip north, we can give you directions. Next, I think it's you.
So this plan that I'm going to talk about very quickly is not one that we worked on. However, it's an incredibly well put together plan. And so I think it's very much worth mentioning as an example. But Feed Northampton was a plan that was created in 2010 for the city of Northampton, Mass. In the western area of the state. And so this plan was initiated from the Northampton Food Security Group, which is just a group that's managed by community members. And so largely their concern was about the future was the city's food supply in the face of climate change, diminishing oil availability, and loss of farmland. And so this planning document really represented a comprehensive vision for local food that promotes food security, sustainable agriculture, and economic development in the farming sector, in production and distribution and all of that. specifically. And so it really consisted of a heavy analysis of the existing open space and the built environment within the city of Northampton, the city's current food assets. So what were the existing farms? Were there any local food distribution suppliers, things like that? Was the city's zoning prohibitive in any areas of the city to food production, and how so? And then even looking at food access and transportation. So where were the grocery stores, the farmers markets, where were those happening in the city? What were the demographics of the different neighborhoods within the city? Was there places where healthy, local, accessible food was able to be accessed within walking distance, within biking distance, within driving distance? So all of these were looked at in this kind of existing conditions analysis of this report. And essentially what the report did was that it introduced 4 districts. And so that included urban, rural, suburban, and agricultural. And each district was analyzed for its capacity for food cultivation. It also included case studies and food production strategies that would work for each of the districts, ranging from rotational grazing for a property that was in the agricultural district to neighborhood gardens in, the suburban or urban areas of the city. So really exciting project and a great way to kind of scale up some smaller food system efforts that might be happening in a community to take a more a citywide approach. And this plan really set up implementation well. It got neighbors talking, it got community leaders invested in further developing the local food system within the Northampton area. And so when 120 acres of prime farmland came up for sale in the center of Florence, Massachusetts, which is really close by to Northampton, the community basically took advantage of that opportunity, developed a nonprofit called Grow Food Northampton, and raised $670,000 in order to buy the land and then develop a vision, which is shown here, of both a community garden and space that could be leased for small farming ventures, so that there was an economic kind of productive aspect of the plan, as well as an ability for the community gardens to serve as growing space for those who don't own land, and for a giving garden, which produced produce for some of the local food banks and some of the low-income families in the area that were not able to, purchase a community garden or have access to additional funds for, healthy food. So really, really cool project. Highly recommend checking out Grow Food Northampton's website, especially for some of the community gardens that do exist within Northampton as well. They have great resources as far as community garden, either startup, maintenance, things like that. And I'll just mention this really quickly. The other one I wanted to just note was Somerville, Massachusetts developed a report. It's a food assessment for their local food system, and it's super well done. It includes their sort of existing conditions analysis of their food system and how well it addresses food security, opportunities for utilizing some of the resources that exist in the city for additional food system initiatives. They were really looking at ways that they could increase or improve population health and equitable and just access to local food. So this is a really great report, and we're a little over, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it right now, but feel free to ask questions during the Q&A portion later on. Go ahead, Steve.
I don't know, Liz. I think you got us back on track time-wise. That was good.
Good.
Yeah. All right. So we have a couple more examples just to kind of to put on the table, and then we're going to be going to questions and comments in a few minutes. So Portsmouth, a couple people have told me that Portsmouth and Newburyport have a lot in common. Just looking at the geography, it makes sense. And I know that you have a lot of residents that you have shared back and forth professionally. So I could see you being pretty well tied together. We were fortunate to work on an open space project that was really focused on green infrastructure planning for Portsmouth. Next slide. And one of the reasons I wanted to share this project is it's something that I would like to see my own community do, really looking at and understanding the open spaces, both the conserved natural lands and lands that are open and have yet to be conserved, and understand the assets, how those lands are being stewarded, the potential for protection, how some of that land is currently or could be part of making the community more resilient. especially if we are a coastal community, to coastal storms, and if you're an inland community, to river flooding and to snowstorms and other things that get thrown the way of communities. So what we were asked to do and what we did along with city staff was to go out and do a deep analysis of these places, and to also look at the lost connections between places, kind of restitching the green infrastructure throughout the community. Next. And in doing so, this is part of the vision that came out for the open space plan, really looking at how do you provide access to the coast for all? And some of these were not new things. They were reinforced in the city's master plan and in other documents leading up to this. How do you conserve land for connectivity, access, and community resilience? How do you restore natural systems even within the built environment? So even within the most densely developed portions of the community, how do you leverage the regulatory system and get people excited about non-regulatory initiatives as well, community gardens, planting and caring for street trees? And how do you address equity in the availability of ecosystem services? One of the great things that we did with the GIS person on this project was to take a deep dive into where people live and look at their income levels and the kind of mix of the community, and then what's their access to open spaces. And some of the hardest hit neighborhoods had the least access to open space, not surprising. And so we were able to talk about that in this planning process and to emphasize parts of the community that really need an investment in protecting and restoring the natural resources that are there and giving people access to being part of a resilient system and all the benefits, all those ecosystem services that they can receive. Next. This is a beautiful graphic that Liz created that kind of showed what came out of this process. It's a transect showing that from, the most intact system on the far right of your screen all the way to the most urban, that there are opportunities to protect or to regenerate lost natural resources. And that over time we can restitch the system so that we have a more intact, more resilient green infrastructure network to support our human components of our communities. Next. And the result was a long-term plan for additional protection, places that are showing up in yellow on the map on the left, and lots of specific projects that were identified and lots of different initiatives being pulled together into kind of one implementation plan. So this was a really fun project. It's not unique to Portsmouth. This is another place I think we looked at Massachusetts as a bit of an example, like Liz said about energy. More Massachusetts communities have open space plans and have been thinking about open space for a long time. New Hampshire communities are a little bit behind in this area. All right, next. We also wanted to just touch on, beyond the municipal scale, if we're thinking about community resilience, how do we look as a region? And so one example is a project we worked on in southeastern New Hampshire, 7 towns, the Moose Mountains region of the state, and it was a strategic conservation plan. Next, Liz. And the emphasis was to identify and conserve the important natural areas, including water resources, farm and forest lands, wildlife habitat, recreational areas, cultural and scenic areas. And the tagline for the initiative and for the final plan was our home, our land, our tomorrow, because the stakeholders who were participating, many of which didn't live there anymore, they were engaged in the process. They maybe had a family place, but they had moved to other states for work or for other commitments, and had hoped to come back. Others were multi-generational and had been there a long time. Some people were newcomers, but this theme, they all loved this region. And they all had different stories and different aspects of the region that resonated with them. And so it was used as an opportunity to educate others about efforts that were underway or about issues that need to be addressed in the future, while recognizing that each of the communities is unique. It has kind of its own vision for its own future. And together they talked about the eventual vision of a greenway, connecting all the communities, and within that greenway, natural areas, but also preserved food systems, forest systems, and other components of what they saw as a resilient future. Next. Closer to you, and a project that we know less about, but we were looking into, is this project, Resilient Together, which is taking place in Beverly and Salem. And there may be folks that are on the Zoom tonight that have been involved and know more. In looking at it a little bit, it was interesting. The description was, we are embracing a proactive, collaborative approach as we develop Resilient Together, our climate action and resilience plan. This will help ensure that we remain inclusive and thriving communities that are attractive and accessible to diverse families and businesses. So if it's not an initiative that you're aware of, it may be one you want to look into. It looks like it has extensive community outreach and participation. Next. And because we couldn't cover everything in the time we had tonight, Liz put this nice slide together to just reinforce that, you know, it's about thinking differently about our housing solutions, about our transportation solutions, our energy solutions. We have all the models. In a lot of ways, we have all the tools on the table to do the work we need to do. We just need to come together and figure out what the right fit is for our communities and how to move it forward. So next slide. And we waited to the end to give you the one thing you need to know about community resilience. And I think I shared this with Sheila at one point. We talked last summer. In the end, what it really comes down to is people. It comes down to people. It comes down to relationships. We are here tonight because of all of you and the relationships you've formed with each other. I'm also here tonight because my neighbor helped shovel me out when I was at work today. So it's how we take care of each other. It's our ability to respond to crisis, whether it's a personal crisis or a community-wide crisis or an international crisis like we've experienced this year. So this social capital, these bonds between community members are way more important than how many acres of food we have in production or how many solar panels we put up. Those are really important actions as well. But if we don't have the human piece and we don't have trust and we don't have a working relationship with each other, I don't think we're going to go as far. So if you have that, if you have the community piece, I think you're ahead of most. And so with that, I think we're to the Q&A portion, and we can hand it back over to Sheila or someone from Storm Surge if they want to facilitate.
Yep, I'm going to step in. This is Sarah Tappan. If you stop sharing, I think it would be nice to go to the gallery view for the Q&A.
That's great.
So people can see each other, and you can turn on your video if you want and unmute yourself and ask questions at this point. If you'd like to, if we get people talking over each other, then we're going to ask you to raise your hand. But I think when we've done this in past meetings, it's worked just to kind of open it up for questions. So would anybody like to start with a question? Just take yourself off mute and you can ask your question now. I've got one in the chat from Jack Garvey. According to the food chart for Somerville, that city geographically the smallest in Massachusetts, has 293 restaurants. I'm wondering if that's even possible or possibly a typo. I'm curious if there's a general rule for restaurants that respect or hurt the environment, or how green they are, or put another way, what should we know about them environmentally?
It's a great question, or series of questions. Yeah, not quite sure. It could be a typo. I'm not as familiar with Somerville as I'm sure other people are. But I think one of the biggest reasons they included restaurants in that sort of snapshot of the food system is that restaurants represent a potential purchaser of local food within an area. So I think that is one of the main reasons how they're sort of evaluating just like potential buyers of local food within that particular area. In terms of whether there's a general rule for restaurants that respect or hurt the environment, I don't think that this particular report looked into practices that individual restaurants were using, although that is definitely an important piece of the puzzle. But I don't think it was part of the report that particular initiative looked at. Yeah. Steve, do you have anything to add about that? Okay, great.
I wondered while you were talking, you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, Newburyport has just published the Resiliency Plan, which is the result of a huge, long effort from a lot of people. And we, as storm surge, are starting to look at how we can help the city in terms of communicating that and building support behind it. From the various initiatives that you've looked at in other areas, do you have any suggestions for the best way to kind of gain community buy-in for these programs?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. The fact that you're reading a plan that other people worked so hard on is wonderful. That's the first step. The second thing is you're asking the right questions. How can we help? Depending on who's responsible ultimately for carrying that plan out, who the different groups are, local decision makers, regulatory boards, others, I think showing up, I think talking to those members, they so seldom get asked, how can we help you? And what we think you're working on is important. That could go a long way. And I think there may be some things that naturally to your group kind of resonate, and there may be some things that you don't feel either qualified or kind of driven to do. So I would say help in the areas that you're most excited as individuals.
Yeah, and I'm just going to tack onto that really quick too. One thing that we've been encouraging communities that we've been working with to consider doing, and this might already be part of the implementation process for this plan, but if it's not, it could be something that's worth bringing up, is that sometimes it's helpful if a representative actually gives an annual update on the implementation of the plan. That's a video, maybe accessible on the city website, just so that sometimes it can be hard to follow these multi-year efforts, especially when there's different groups that are working on different things. And all of a sudden a few years goes by and, people are like, what's happening with it? Like, what have we done? So sometimes it can help having some representative or group to actually, give some type of public update on the implementation of it annually so that progress can be tracked in a more public way.
That's a great idea. Tom, I see you raising your hand. You have to come off mute. Can you change your settings so that you're not muted?
How's that?
Good.
Yeah, good.
Perfect.
I'd like to pick up on where Steve left off, because to me, one of the most important things about any of these efforts, I mean, it's great to see how things come out, but I'm interested in the wisdom of sharing things with people. And wisdom is something that's not very well understood or studied or anything. And so wisdom involves, in this case, motivational factors, I think. And so to pick up on where you were, Steve, there are people in the community who really care. They'd like to do something and so on. But I wonder if you could both maybe spend a minute or two talking about what you've observed as far as getting people started and getting people involved and motivating people and sharing the wisdom of some of the people who are watching tonight and other people in the community who've been through some of this and have shared what's gone on in different communities.
Sure. I'll try not to go on too long, so hopefully Liz will stop me if I do. I think, Tom, that sometimes we can, as I was saying earlier, we can show up to a planning board or a conservation commission and we can offer our services, and there may be a role that we can fill. Sometimes the community isn't ready for that kind of outside help, or the focus of what the grassroots organization wants to work on doesn't align with what the city or town wants to do. And in some of those cases, we've seen small groups of people do really amazing things. An example from our neck of the woods is around renewable energy and food systems. And there were a group of us that weren't so interested in working within just one municipality, and none of the municipalities were interested in kind of cooperating and thinking about how do we encourage the deployment of these renewable energy systems to make up for what New Hampshire isn't doing, and how do we encourage the production and the sale of local food. And so we had to create a nonprofit, and we had to kind of figure it out together. We had to look at other models from other communities. And what ended up happening in the process was a tremendous amount of community connections, those personal relationships that form. And that was a benefit that none of us get into looking to see that happen, but I think that was probably the greater outcome. I don't know, Liz, if you'd have an example to share.
You're on mute, Liz.
Muted.
Sorry about that. Not yet, but I might think of one as we go, and I'll share it.
Awesome. Steve, could you say a little bit more about the Franklin Park project?
I could. I was at danger of saying too much already, so you can stop me, Sarah. So the Franklin project is like a backstory where I got involved there maybe 9 years ago. This was kind of maybe to part of Tom's point. There was one lone individual that was really seeing the city of Franklin from a perspective that nobody else was. And he started talking to lots of other folks. I think more than half of them thought he was a little insane because he had such a positive, glowing view of what Franklin could become. And so he reached out and got a small group of us who are from outside of the city to come and meet and to think about doing a really deep dive, a 2-week-long design charrette focused on the ecological ability of the downtown while addressing affordable housing, food security, all these issues. We had fun. We actually set it up as a class. We got a bunch of people to come and participate. And then it was presented at a morning weekday municipal meeting. So not often well attended, and they had 50 people,
Wow.
largely business owners and other activists, people involved in different parts of the community. And so it started to really get its own energy behind it. And local people took it and actually started to add layers of understanding and take it places that we as outsiders really couldn't. And at some point it started to plateau and it wasn't going any further. It really didn't have a way of kind of inspiring people and showing action. There wasn't any big project or anything. And the individual who is now the executive director for Mill City Park came to town to open a store, an outdoor recreation store, saw Franklin as an outdoor recreation destination. And once again, was kind of the only person that saw that, and started saying, I hear what you want to do. And I think one of the ways to do it is to build this park. And now Franklin has, I think at the city manager's last report, it has somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million of investment that's been permitted and is starting in 2021. So 2 more mills are being redeveloped. A bunch of new businesses have started, and people are starting to intentionally move there. And that's a new phenomenon for them. And the park itself is going to be there for residents as well as visitors. So it's a unique situation, but it's definitely one to watch, and hopefully will inspire other creative solutions in other communities.
That's awesome.
I also have a response to Tom's question now. Sorry for coming in a little late. But his question was on how to engage, fellow community members of the public, and initiate action, or at least motivate action. And a lot of what we do, a lot of community engagement, a lot of public outreach in the projects that we're engaged in, both professionally and personally. And we're oftentimes trying to reach a really broad audience. So that might range from families to older folks to, different populations within a community. And all those different populations are going to respond to different aspects of an issue. And so we really try to focus on promoting or explaining an issue in the broadest way possible, so that, if we're talking to a school system, obviously the educational aspect of, community and school gardens is going to be, of particular interest to them. If you're talking to business owners in a community, it might be a slightly different angle. But it's all truth, all of these different types of issues are very multifaceted and complex, but different aspects of it are going to resonate with different types of people. And that tends to, what we've noticed at least, generate more excitement among different folks if you play to that a little bit more. So.
Ken, I noticed you had come off mute. Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
No, I kind of Actually, it was a question I was going to ask that was very similar to yours, Sarah. So
I need to come off mute. Does anybody else have a question?
mm.
Sure, Tom, go ahead. You have to come off mute again.
I guess I wanted to just make a comment, which is that I think sometimes what happens is really pretty simple. And an example from my own experience, I taught at a community college for many decades, and the Al Gore movie came out, and I got somewhat stirred up by that. So I just made an appointment, and I went into the president's office, and I said, "So have you seen this? Have you seen the movie?" "Yeah, I saw it." And I said, "Well, what are we going to do?" He said, "Well, what do you want to do?" Which, of course, was a good question. I said, "Well, I want to name a committee, the President's Committee on Environmental Concerns, and I want to get going and have the college do something." He said, "Okay." I mean, that's really what was involved. And so, finding a time when people can meet is always tricky. I said, "Well, okay, we'll get together at 7 o'clock in the morning." And I thought, well, this is going to be, we'll see what happens. 40 faculty people showed up.
Wow.
It was sort of hitting at the right time. And out of that has grown an ongoing focus. So I guess I want to say two things. Sometimes it's a simple thing that you have to do. The other thing is that the fallout from those simple things is sometimes pretty amazing, because I found out that educational institutions, and I think this is true in all communities. I'm not surprised that Northampton really has a great program, because they've got so many schools around there, and I'm sure they've used those resources. But sometimes it's just saying something like, we should have a meeting and develop an interest group and have it at a time when people can do it. And I think Storm Surge has really done very well at this. I mean, and it's great. All of us could be here tonight despite the snowstorm. And I don't think we would have chosen this method, but here we are at this method. So we're going on, and the fallout can be pretty amazing. That program really educated me, because educational institutions from high schools to kids in elementary schools to colleges and universities can have an ongoing, very profound presence and help people to get on board and understand phenomena that they see that they might not have looked into very deeply. So it's been a good experience, and I think we're sharing some of that here.
Yeah, very much.
Tom, thanks for sharing that. It made me think of another example too, to kind of build on what you just shared about just kind of showing up and presenting the idea, initiating it. We were working on a downtown plan in a community, kind of economically depressed community, and your morning meeting reminded me, they like to meet at 8 in the morning, and they had a working group. So it was beyond city staff. It was, we as a consulting group, the city staff, and whoever else would show up, kind of working group. And there were mornings where there were 40 people, because everybody's in their silo. They're all working towards their own kind of purpose or vision. But when they were invited to come in and talk about what they saw as the potential for downtown and solutions that they had in mind, they really started to form relationships with each other. And when Liz and I told them that what they wanted to do for outreach was way beyond what they had for a budget, they stepped up and said, well, we'll do all the other stuff. Like, they just came together and said, we'll staff the tables and we'll show up at the events. And it's going to live long beyond us because of that. And I think the resilience plan, Sarah, if you all can convene that kind of energy and pull in groups that maybe wouldn't be considered or wouldn't be engaged in thinking about resilience, but definitely are part of your safety net, that would be fantastic.
Great idea. Well, we're approaching 8 o'clock here. Are there any other last minute questions people would like to get a chance to ask? You guys have given us a number of great things to follow up on. As we mentioned at the beginning, and Jack, I'll get to your question in a second, but as we mentioned at the beginning, we are recording this. It will be published on the Storm Surge website. So if you have anything you want to go back and look at, I know there were a number of the slides that mentioned other projects that I want to go back and follow up on. So if anybody else has that feeling too, it will be available for you. Jack asked one more last comment about the Franklin and Northampton. Remind me of what happened in one comment, Franklin and Northampton, remind me of what happened in Cleveland and Akron 20 to 25 years ago, both of which were driven by historic preservation.
Well, the question that I guess to put that in a question is, are we looking toward, or should we be looking toward putting this resiliency, the movement toward green, into what happened with historic preservation in the late 60s into the early 70s and beyond? I mean, Newburyport, Salem, we're no strangers here to it.
Yeah, we think so, Jack.
Okay.
And Vic, a great example of local project is Western Mass, Shelburne's Bridge of Flowers. Yeah, very small funding, but a great draw for people to an almost deserted downtown. Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. Okay, Sheila, I see you've gone back to your other computer. Do you want to take over and say something at the end here? You'll have to come off mute. There you go.
Yeah. So if we're all through, I want to thank everyone for coming, and Steve and Liz, I want to thank you for your presentation. I'm so glad we were able to get together on this snowy day, and we'll try and think more about what we can do. So the rest of you, we're going to be having our speaker series in the spring focusing on the resiliency plan, and we'll be informing you what we're doing through our newsletter. So if you're on tonight and you don't get our newsletter, you can sign up for it on our website, which is storm-surge.org. And then you'll get the newsletters telling you what we're planning. So thank everyone for being here tonight, and I wish you all happy and healthy holidays.
Thank you all. It was great.